Good afternoon, Eastern Washington. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from the capital of free Washington, the future state of liberty, Spokane Valley. Once again, brought to you by the committee to elect Matt Shea, Republican, in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news. It's not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. And once again, our hope is not in man, but in Jesus Christ. And we can't end in prayer. We must also move to action. As Ephesians 2:5-6 says, God made us alive together with Christ and raised us up with him and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. Amen and amen. Are we acting victorious? Are we? I don't know. But there is an interesting corollary to that statement. Very interesting corollary. And the corollary is this, that if we're to succeed, we need to be in Christ. Christ needs to be in us. And I clearly believe that, as General Dees says in his book, Resilient Nations, and if you've not read that, you need to read it. I'm partway through it now, and it's a fascinating read. But the central idea is that virtue, that spiritual infrastructure is critical to a nation, just like economic infrastructure, just like political infrastructure, just like technological infrastructure, military infrastructure. It's critical to the survival of a nation. And came across a quote this morning I shared on Facebook. I just want to read it to you from Sam Adams, 1779. Sam Adams says this: a general dissolution of principles and manners will more surely overthrow the liberties of America than the whole force of the common enemy. While the people are virtuous, they cannot be subdued, but when once they lose their virtue, then they will be ready to surrender their liberties to the first external or internal invader. Now, we've been talking a while on this show about where we're headed as a country, where we're headed as a nation. And it's interesting that it all boils down to an individual decision. Ultimately, everything does. Whether or not we continue as a country, the direction we're going, whether or not we change direction, is all an individual decision. All a decision about what we do, what we accept as individuals. Are we virtuous? Are we praying? Are we putting God at the center of our country? We're putting God at the center of our lives, at the center of our family, at the center of our business, or whatever other avocation we might have. This spiritual infrastructure, the virtue of a nation, is the glue that holds it together. And what we're seeing today is a group of people who say, we no longer agree with the Constitution. And will say, and it looks like do anything to get rid of it. And in so doing, lose their own virtue and show that they lack virtue to begin with. You can see this in many different ways. You can see it in the lack of logical, reasoned debate, where people will just automatically throw an invective or a label on somebody without backing it up. And usually the label is, that people, they accuse people of being a Christian bigot, or they accuse people of being racist, or they, accuse people of wanting to protect antiquated views and ways. Look, truth is truth. It's immutable. That means it doesn't change over time. It's true. It doesn't change. So no matter what you try to say about it, it's still true. It was true in the Roman times. And it was true in the times before that, in the Greek times. It was true in the Anglo-Saxon period. It was true in other parts of Europe in the late 1800s. It is true today. Still true. The idea that we don't get our rights from government, we get our rights from God. That means nobody can take them away. And so these people today that are advocating that people have their firearms seized, people have their firearms confiscated, what they are really advocating is civil war. They are advocating that we do away with the Constitution, not by vote. Not by vote, but by bureaucracy, violent protest. We just do away with it. And if we don't agree on the Constitution, look, go live somewhere else. I'm sure Venezuela could use you. But if you're going to live here in America, we have to agree on the Constitution. And so when you hear people today not having a logical, reasoned debate about why these things exist, and typically these people have never been anywhere in the world outside of Western Europe, Canada. They haven't been to third world countries. They haven't seen the way the rest of the world actually operates, but they think they know. But they don't. All they know is that they can control more through a socialist system. And, people then will say, well, this is fear-mongering. There's a difference between creating fear and acknowledging reality. And on this show, we acknowledge reality. We acknowledge the way things are on the ground. We acknowledge sometimes that things may not be as they appear, as General Vallely did on Tuesday. And some things may be as they appear, as, again, General Vallely mentioned on Tuesday, particularly with China. So, formal logic, when people lose virtue, doesn't necessarily work anymore. Because people are operating in rhetoric, they're operating in emotion. Because that is the way that they can continue without virtue. I know that might be a little deep, but it's true. And we need to look at this stuff. And I'm going to talk about the 51st state at length today. And we're going to have a guest on from State of Jefferson today, too, talk about how their movement is going and some of the things that are happening down there. But people want to preserve truth for generations. That is truly what it means to be conservative or a classical liberal. Or, if you prefer, somebody that believes in the idea of natural law, that there is law written on creation, written on man's heart, and that it's our job to discover those truths. In fact, if you go back and look at some of the things like political science, they treated everything as a science, as a discovery of a truth that we didn't know before. But once they discovered the truth, then it became a law, right? Second law of thermodynamics, Gresham's law. It would become a law, but you wouldn't change it. But today, people will argue that we need to change, that we need to evolve things over time. And that's just code words for saying there is no truth. And the fact is funny about that statement is that by saying there is no truth, you're acknowledging there's truth. And if you want to even get deeper into this, the existence of truth proves the existence of God. In fact, the existence of the ability to reason proves the existence of God. And that is a very profound statement, like E equals MC squared. Just think about it. But to get to that point, you need to have virtue. You need to be able to say, hey, I was wrong. I want to learn. There is truth. Virtue is dependent on the acknowledgement that, yes, there is truth in this world. And the corollary to that, yes, there is evil in this world. So as Christians, as patriots, we need to be out there getting back to formal logic, getting back to discussions that matter, and ignoring, and I believe dismissing, the emotional arguments of they must be part of a Christian racist hate cult because they want to keep their guns and Bibles and property and small business. I think we just dismissed that. And I think if you're trying to talk to somebody that's saying something like that, you just say, what primary source documents do you have to back that up? Because they almost never do. And usually the ones that they do have, they're implying something through the primary source document. In other words, they read into it what they want. And then you can have a discussion about that. But this has got to start in our families, at the dinner table, having these robust discussions at the dinner table about what's happening in this country and the lack of virtue and the crumbling of our spiritual infrastructure in this country. If we don't do that, if we don't return to virtue, it'll be almost impossible to return to freedom. And that brings me right now to your daily intelligence briefing on the international front in the Middle East. Turkey takes Afrin. Now, General Valley the other day said that he thinks they're going to stop there. Still an interesting flashpoint in Syria. Iran, rumors running rampant that deal is going to be abrogated. Probably a good thing that happened, but there's a big but caveat on that. Do we need to be seeking war again in the Middle East? I think the answer is no. I think there are peaceful solutions. And I think that if you are going to go to war, you do it according to the Constitution. And I think that's where we continue to mess up, is by not going to war according to the Constitution. Have a formal debate and declaration of war. And I'm not talking the vote for war. Have an actual debate on it. Should we be doing this? Interestingly enough, as well in the Middle East, this letter by 23 rabbis of the reconstituted Sanhedrin demanding the building of the third temple and asking Muslims for help in doing that, to bring about a new era of peace in the era of Messiah. Fascinating reading. I mean, it's just fast. It's like out of a novel. Fascinating reading. But another possible flashpoint. I mean, if they decide to try to build something up there, that's a flashpoint. The Arabs have said it's a flashpoint. So for now, a letter, but very interesting nonetheless. On the international front as well, China engaging in a robust space warfare program, trying to outdo the United States, but you know, the observation was made, and I agree with this. I mean, they got the technology from us, and that's part of the thing with communist countries. They don't have a lot of innovation. They have to steal it from other countries, right? So the Russians did this during the Cold War. They would steal innovation from the United States of America. Everything from the nuclear bomb to, tanks. They would steal it. So there is concern that the Chinese are leaping ahead of us. That's probably overblown, based on a few conversations that I've had. But they are indeed looking at space warfare. They are indeed looking at weaponizing capital, buying up assets in foreign countries to then use later. They are weaponizing big data with some of their computer hacking teams. And those are all very serious things that we need to take and make plans for. In addition to that, the trade war, so-called trade war, as I mentioned on Tuesday, when you lower the income tax in a country, then you can raise the tariff, okay? Because if price is raised and they're absorbed, that's how you do it so it doesn't upset the economy. That's what Trump is doing right now. But also, suddenly it brings the Chinese to the table to negotiate trade. And I got to tell you something. Republicans have been terrible on trade for the last 20 years. This so-called free trade, which wasn't free, wasn't about trade, but created an imbalance in America, so our workers lost their jobs and manufacturing left this country. And remember, they said that would never happen, and it did. So the people that predicted that are vindicated. And the idea of returning manufacturing to the United States is really a good idea. And oh, by the way, for those that are concerned about the environment, we have the cleaner manufacturing processes than China. So if you believe in a clean environment, clean air, if you believe in jobs coming back to America, then the way that this is shaping up is actually the right direction. And that we shouldn't have trade deals where we're the loser all the time. Also, on the international front, Russia. Largest expulsion of intelligence officers in history, according to some. They closed the Seattle consulate. It's an interesting choice to close the Seattle consulate. I don't know what to... There's not really anything to read into that, I don't know, but very interesting choice. There's got to be some reason behind that. But in addition, the Russians are retaliating in kind with the same number of officers, so you can have this tit-for-tat thing. Ultimately, this will end up in a meeting between Trump and Putin. As General Valley said on Tuesday, maybe it will be in Iceland. I don't know. But certainly this is going to end in a meeting, just like with Reagan and Gorbachev. On the national front, Jim Rickards, analyst of our economy, did some analysis for the Central Intelligence Agency as well back in the day, is warning of the impending International Monetary Fund's turning on of digital cryptocurrency as a world currency, the special drawing rights, the SDR, warning that that's going to happen here in April-May timeframe, maybe later. And that then, who needs the United States petrodollar because everything can be settled in this new world currency. The SDR, special drawing rights, again, a basket of world currencies, or basket of national currencies. But could this be the end of U.S. currency dominance, and how would that affect the economy? Most analysts would agree that it would dramatically affect the economy negatively. Also on the national front, the head of the U.S. Forest Service resigns amid investigations regarding misconduct. I hope the BLM, some parts of the DOJ, and now the FBI are going to be investigated for misconduct as well, and not just for the spying on Trump, but for the handling of the Bundy situation and many other things as well. All right, also on the national front, of course, Trump making a decision to put back on the U.S. Census a question regarding citizenship that obviously has to be a white supremacist agenda, according to none other than a D.C.-based Islamic organization established by Muslim Brotherhood operatives, according to WorldNet Daily. So again, they lose the argument, why should we not ask if you're a citizen or not? That's the purpose of the census, is to determine apportionment for the House of Representatives. And that apportionment is determined based on citizenship. So if you don't ask the question, you are diluting the vote of part of America. And instead, again, of arguing, trying to argue some logical thing, of course, they have to use that it's racist, right? But obviously not, obviously clearly constitutional, obviously integral to the integrity of the country and having truly proportional representation among the citizens of the country who are supposed to vote. Also on the national front, this call to seize guns. Talked about this on Tuesday. There's a new thing I want to add to this. Larry King is who I'm going to add to this. But if you will recall, former Supreme Court Justice Stevens called for a repeal of the Second Amendment. Democrat Georgia lawmakers said, no, we're not talking about confiscation. We're talking about seizing firearms. Then you had this North Carolina sheriff candidate who essentially said that if you won't let us take your guns, we will pry it from your cold, dead hands. Okay? And then adding on to this, Larry King weighs in by saying that the purpose of the Second Amendment was to prevent slave rebellion. In other words, to continue slavery. Okay, so he says, read your history, right? Well, I think he really needs to read history because it was very clear, actually, that the so-called black codes in the South were an attempt to keep former slaves disarmed. And part of the initial founding of the National Rifle Association was for the arming of former slaves in the South. Now, the other interesting part about this, too, is historically, one Southern legislator even was explicit in the purpose of what they were doing down in the South by saying this, quote, that they were doing it because it's easier to control a person who is disarmed or control a man who does not have a gun, end quote. Wow. Okay, then that led to the 14th Amendment, so there would be equal protection of the laws. In other words, former slaves would have the right to bear arms. So this whole thing, you see how the left tries to turn this around? And it's so interesting to me because the Irish penal laws in the 1600s specifically forbade the Irish from having a sword, okay? The English did that because they disarmed them. They were easier to control. And then this progressed in other parts of Europe as well into modern times. But the whole purpose behind disarmament has always been to enslave a portion of a people. Historically, that's what history says. According to Larry King, that is exactly the opposite. So, who are you going to believe? Unbelievable. That's what it is. It's unbelievable we're even having this discussion in today's day and age. And if you want to talk about horrific treatment of disarmed people, look at Ukraine, what Stalin did in Ukraine. Look at what happened in Cambodia. I mean, this is all modern times. I mean, this is not that long ago. We got to be ever vigilant. We really do. All right. Also, on the regional front, this ISIS-inspired teen who brought a bomb to school in Utah, still not very much in the mainstream media about that at all. Continue to focus on this gun confiscation issue. You have a clearly orchestrated, organized effort to abolish the right to bear arms. And it was good to hear Trump today say that he was going to defend the right to bear arms. That would not go away. But you can't compromise either by banning parts on a firearm because they might be scary. Because then what happens is you ban starting at the buttstock all the way to the foregrip, and pretty soon the gun's banned. I hope he realizes that. Also on the regional front, update on the Bundy case out of Nevada, this new Larry Wooten email. We're still trying to get a hold of it, a copy. Apparently there might be a protective order in place. I don't know how long that's going to last, but we'll keep you updated on that. But apparently this new Larry Wooten email, again, raising some very serious questions as to the conduct of both the Department of Justice and the BLM in the case. And I hope this congressional investigation that we requested continues and that the truth comes out. Also on the regional front, the session in Idaho, Representative Heather Scott, just ecstatic. The best session, she says, in a decade. They stopped Medicaid expansion. They had tax relief. They passed 3 pro-gun bills. They passed some pro-life bills. Amazing. They legalized the use of CBD oil. That's a non-psychoactive portion of medical cannabis, which has been shown to have some pretty dramatic effects for traumatic brain injury and some other things. They They passed out of the House, but they got held up in the Idaho Senate, the anti-Sharia law bill. Held up in the Senate, as well was civil asset forfeiture protection. Both of those bills held up by Senator Sitaway in Idaho. So, my goodness. They had bills to reduce regulation. They had private property rights strengthened with a trespass law on postings. They had just a phenomenal session. I wish we had something like that in Washington State. So I'm going to try to get Heather Scott on and talk a little bit about their session. But wow, Idaho, as in stark contrast to Washington, expanding freedom, shrinking the size of government, and lowering taxes. Well done. Well done, Idaho legislature. Well done. All right, on the regional front as well, let's talk about the 51st state briefly. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few things. The first, people said, hey, is this popular? Between 73 and 75% that weighed in on this, of over 10,000 people, said yes, they want to split. Then you had a bunch of people say, is it constitutional? Yes, it is. Under Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution, a state may split with a simple majority vote of the state legislature and Congress. Easy. Then people said, is this a new idea? Well, obviously it's not. There are autonomy movements all over the world. In Europe, there's dozens of them. But also, we've had this happen before in the United States with West Virginia and now also the State of Jefferson movement that we're going to be talking about a little bit later in the show. Then they said, no, you won't be able to function. You guys are a bunch of welfare freeloaders in Eastern Washington. To which my response is, we're so sorry of being such a burden. We want to give you more money to spend on your socialist programs in downtown Seattle. Just let us go, and that'll happen. And hilariously, they don't really have a response to that. So then they said, no, you're not going to be able to function. You won't have enough money to run the state. Now, the Liberty State would have about the same population as the entire state of Idaho, very similar within a few $100 million, which for state budgets is very close, very similar in total revenue. So, yeah, we'd have more than enough money. Then there were people that say, well, if I can't beat you there, you're not going to have enough taxes for schools. Again, not true. In fact, 9% of the revenue that goes to the state of Washington right now is property taxes. Do you think we could find 9% savings in our budgets? Absolutely we could. And so we wouldn't need to pay property taxes. And people were saying, well, how would you fund schools? Well, you use the rest of the budget to fund that. Sales and use taxes. It's just interesting to me that people are not thinking outside of the box with some of this stuff. And in addition to that, we spend over half of our budget in Washington State, over half, on K-12 education, higher education, Medicaid. Do you think we could find some savings there? Yes, of course we could. We absolutely could. We could get money down to the classroom instead of having it lost in the bureaucracy so our teachers can actually teach. Then you have people that will say, no. You would be the poorest state in the union. Despite the fact we're number one in apples, Concord grapes, red raspberries, pears, sweet cherries, hops, potatoes, wine, onions, edible peas, apricots, and lentils, we're number 2 in, starting with the potatoes. Number 3 in hay. Number 4 in wheat. Number 9 in total forest land. Number 9 in the U.S. for total energy production. And by the way, most of the energy generation is in Eastern Washington. And we're number 27th for mineral production and number 29th for total cows. Now, I think our ranching industry will be a lot bigger if we were a separate state that actually managed the predators and allowed our ranchers to protect their property rights. So we wouldn't be poor. So then what happens? Okay, so we defeat them on every argument, answer all the questions, and then they say this: of course, you all must be part of a racist hate cult. That's what this is all about, is forming a racist Christian cult in Eastern Washington, right? Because if you want to keep your Bibles and you want to keep your guns and your property, you want to have lower taxes, That must be the case. No, of course it's not. But if they go to that argument, you've already won. You've already won. And so I think that's a pretty good segue now to the local front. Got the Red Pill Expo coming up, June 21st through 23rd. Got a lot of great people going to be there. Del Bigtree is going to be there. Trevor Loudon is going to be there. A lot of other big names are signing on right now. It's going to be right here in Spokane, Washington. In addition to that, on the local front, this Saturday, 10 o'clock, Sadie Halstead Middle School in Newport, Washington, at 10 o'clock this Saturday, we are going to be doing the 51st State presentation. Now, it may be bumped back later, so I want to make sure, and I'll announce that at the end of the show, so pay attention. It may be later in the day, so I got to confirm the time there, but it's going to be this Saturday in Newport, Washington. We'll be doing another 51st State presentation. And that's the briefing. Remember, the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. Thank you to everybody that's been praying for the show. And make sure you go to Facebook/Patriot Radio US. Like the page, share it with your friends and family far and wide. Doesn't matter where you are in the United States. Patriot Radio can reach you there on iTunes, Podbean, and you can share it everywhere. Message of freedom and liberty. And remember, too, this is a listener-supported show. You can go to voteshay.com, help keep us on the air. And I'm glad to introduce my guest today, Mark Baird, State of Jefferson, kind of the modern driving force behind the State of Jefferson. Thanks once again for being on Patriot Radio.
Hey, thanks for having me, Joe. Appreciate it.
So, Mark, I got to tell you, there's just a lot of interesting articles floating out around there about State of Jefferson. They briefly mentioned Eastern Washington. Fox News had it on. How are things shaping up down there for you, and what's the kind of media coverage you're getting recently?
Well, we've been getting more media coverage recently, but it's more because of the Cal exit thing and some of the other stuff that's going on. The sanctuary state and some of the counties are literally rebelling against the state government, and some of the cities are rebelling against the state government, and some sheriffs have come out and said that they won't support sanctuary state. We've written letters to the United States Attorney General requesting that the governor be arrested for violation of U.S. Code Title 8, Section 1324, which is harboring and shielding an illegal alien. That's a federal felony. And we're pressing for a sedition argument against the state of California. And if we can find that the state of California is in sedition, then we're going to appeal directly to the United States Congress for statehood, just like West Virginia did in 1861.
So now people are saying, well, there must be a hidden agenda behind these state splits, right? There must be some sort of a racist Christian cult behind all of this stuff. How are you addressing some of these things where they try to make you out to be some sort of a fringe movement instead of a very popular movement in your area?
Well, I mean, their first response to us is, "Well, you must be white, or you wouldn't want this." And I find those things so ridiculous. A lot of those news organizations I won't even talk to. For example, CNN wanted to do a deal on Jefferson, and we said, no, no thanks. You're just going to make some kind of white racist thing out of this, and you can do that without our help. Just write a fake story and pretend we were in on it. And so we just don't talk to them. This is so important, Matt, that we are going forward. We're going to finish this. We're in court. Our case was just refiled in federal court again. We have to win. If we don't win, this country is lost, because we have no liberty and we have no representation in rural America, and the cities have all the power, just as Chief Justice Earl Warren intended for them to have with Reynolds versus Sims. And we have to take back this country so that all of the communities in our country have voice again. And that's what Jefferson's really about. Everyone deserves liberty, and I don't care what you look like or what you call yourself. We all deserve liberty, but we have no voice because there are 5 or 6 major cities in the United States, and they run all politics. And that's what we want to stop with the state of Jefferson.
Well, you brought up a very good point with that Supreme Court case. A lot of people don't even know about it, but it really changed the country, and it flew way under the radar. If you can describe how that affected representation in this country, number one, and number two, Talk a little bit about, the idea that Thomas Jefferson had, that the yeoman farmer, those people that were closest to the land, kept and preserved the values that make a nation great for the next generation.
Well, I mean, that's true. And Thomas Jefferson was a brilliant man. He was a genius, and he was very plain-spoken. And also Thomas Paine in his pamphlet, Common Sense. He said the first legislatures would be held under the branches of a big tree, and everyone would just meet and talk about things. And as society grew, we would need to elect more and more representatives so that each part of the colony would remain with adequate representation. And we needed to increase representation as population grew so that our representatives would never develop a separate agenda from the people they represent. And in California, we have one state senator for 1 million people. He doesn't care what you think. He doesn't care what you want. He can't possibly. He cares about getting reelected, and that takes big money in California. So what we would like to do is form a state where representation is in smaller districts and is adequate for the people that are represented, and so that it's cheap and easy to replace an incumbent who doesn't do a good job. And that's what constitutional republic was meant to be. So with the decisions of Baker versus Carr, Gray versus Sanders, and Reynolds versus Sims, the Supreme Court fundamentally changed the legislative nature of the United States of America, and they got away with it. I mean, nobody said anything. And they created a system that Warren liked to call one man, one vote. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone didn't get a vote before, but what it did mean was in Siskiyou County, I voted for my state senator, and Lassen County voted for theirs. Well, Warren said that wasn't fair. And he said that all state elections would be conducted by apportionment schemes supervised by the federal court. That was the end of state sovereignty, and it was the end of representation in most of the states in America.
So with your lawsuit, you're challenging the notion that we actually truly have non-diluted legitimate representation today. If you can, tell the listeners a little bit about that. And you said you refiled in federal court. Was there a strategic reason you guys did that?
Yeah, we had to refile it because all courts are corrupt, and Edmund Coke said that in the 1700s, and he was right, because the judge knows who pays him. And Article 3 courts, Article 3 of the United States Constitution, gives the courts jurisdiction over all matters of equity and law under the Constitution, not extra-constitutionally. And so what courts have become now is lawmakers. Courts write law. Courts enforce laws, and courts make laws. And you've seen it before 1 million times out of the Ninth Circuit. And so what we're saying the court is saying to us is, although you may not have enough representation in California, since everybody's screwed equally, there's nothing the court will do about it. And that's nothing more than institutionalized tyranny. In fact, the people of China, their president just made himself president for life. So let's imagine they had a court that could deliver justice. Well, the court would say, well, all the Chinese people are ruled by a dictator now, but since they're all equally tyrannized, there's nothing the court would do about it. So that's an excuse courts use to deny the people who created the courts justice. The other excuse they use is justicability. They say, well, there are no benchmarks. If we change the legislature in California, well, how would we do it? Well, the answer, that's easy. Earl Warren did it, and he forced 30 states to change the way they elected state officers, and they weren't really worried about justicability. And besides that, George Washington said 1 for 30,000 is democracy, 1 for 40 is tyranny. Thomas Paine said districts should be small. California has the worst representative ratio in the United States, 350% worse than state number 49. So take the national average. The founders of California formed a state where we had one state senator for every 6,000 and one assemblyman for every 2,500, and they meant it for it to stay that way until the legislature turned to the people and said, it is no longer convenient for us to represent you anymore. And we find that statement reprehensible and unconstitutional.
So with people that have tried to undermine what you're doing, they really do have kind of a hypocritical argument because, you know, with Seattle, for example, they call us a bunch of welfare freeloaders, et cetera, et cetera. And we say, okay, fine. If you don't feel well represented either, this will help you. You'll have more money for your social programs and your socialist schemes. You'll have money coming out your ears for that. And, oh, by the way, you can do all of the wild lefty stuff that you want to do over in that area. We just don't want to have a part of it. But they don't seem to want to acknowledge the fact that they would be better represented as well.
Well, the reason they don't, though, is very palpable, and it's very tyrannical. Number one, they don't have to. We've asked Democrats in Sacramento, why won't you let us go? And their response is they'll look you right in the eye and they'll say, well, we don't have to. We have every single thing we want. Why would we do anything for you? But also, you have things that they want, and they get them without having to pay fair market price for them. We have all the timber in California. We have 88% of the water. We have most of the mineral resources. We have enough resources that we have all the wealth in the world. We're surrounded by God and nature's bounty, and all we need to do is remove the shackles that are on us from Sacramento so that we could be free to use our economy as we have traditionally to make a living for ourselves and our families. And we wouldn't have any problem doing it, but they don't want us to. And that's the definition of tyranny.
Absolutely right it is. And it's they have to be in control. I mean, that's what this is about. They have to be in control, and they can't stand the idea that there might be somebody out there that their big government bureaucratic schemes can't touch and get a hold of.
No, you're absolutely right. And one thing we need to acknowledge that, and I noticed that the Washington Constitution, the preamble is much the same. But, you know, our state was formed on the principles of liberty, Christian principles, Judeo-Christian principles, and the principles of liberty. And I can prove that. And so when we turn to Sacramento and say we demand our liberty, and they say, no, we don't have to give it to you. Well, what we have here in California is we have a government formed by the people to secure our freedom. And we have now become servants of the government that we created. The government is now our master, and we have become its servants. And we're not going to sit still for that. And we are never going to take no for an answer until we regain our liberty.
Well, I appreciate everything you guys are doing down there, because it's kind of neat, because people now from both Eastern Washington and Northern California and Southern Oregon are talking, hey, if you guys go first, remember us. If we go first, we'll remember you. And that's kind of the spirit of America, right? I mean, we want to see success. We want to see a return to fundamental principles, and it's going to take all of us to get there. I don't think it's just going to be a few people in one area. It's going to be a few people in a lot of areas that are going to get there.
Oh, I totally agree. And, you know, we look at our friends and our neighbors in Eastern Washington and Southern and Eastern Oregon, for that matter, and we offer our loyalty, our help, our resources, whatever we have, consider it yours. We will help you. It doesn't matter who's first. It just matters that someone gets there. Set that precedent so that we can begin to restore liberty in this nation. And I have to tell you, both parties hate us for that, because they see that crown slipping off their head and control returning to the people, and they don't like it. We're in the fight for our lives right now, and that if we lose our liberty, our children will grow up in a nation they don't even recognize.
That's exactly right. And, you know, I don't think people understand how close it is. I mean, you've been following some of the debates that have been happening in the mainstream media. They are now openly calling for not just the confiscation of firearms, but the seizure of firearms, as one Georgia state legislator said on Tucker Carlson. 10 years ago, that would have been anathema. But today, I mean, they're serious about this.
There are things that are said in the open now that absolutely appall me, you know, things like confiscation of weapons. Do these people not read history? The largest cause of death in the 20th century was legitimate governments killing their own people after they disarmed them, of course, and the loss of morality in our country. And when we turn our backs on God, guess what he's going to do? He's going to let you. So we really need to create a defensible space where God is welcome and where liberty is the rule of the day, and where we have rule of law and not rule of lawlessness by a group of elites who can do anything they want because you don't have enough representation to stop them.
Now, you guys did a fundraiser recently, and I would like to get your take. I mean, how is the movement booming down there? It looked like the fundraiser was very successful.
Yes, we had one dinner in Shasta County, one fundraiser. We raised $50,000 in that one dinner. And now here's what the state has done to counteract that, because our fundraisers, typically, we raffle off guns. People love it, and they show up for that. Well, there's a bill in the hopper right now to ban charitable organizations from raffling off guns, because they see that as a successful way for the people to raise money to fund our goal of restoring our liberty through adequate representation and statehood. And they are trying to stop us in any and every way they possibly can, and it's not going to work. We're not going to go away ever. We're going to win this, and we have to.
So you have the lawsuit right now. What other things are you guys doing to expand the movement? I've seen your social media presence has been incredible. What are some of the things you're doing, and how can normal, average, everyday folks help with movements like this? Because a lot of people say, well, you don't know how busy I am. Well, actually, most of us do know how busy you are, and here's something small that you can do to help bring freedom and liberty to this generation and hopefully to the next.
Well, I mean, I'm busy myself. You're busy, and you're still doing it. I run a ranch. I run a business. I've got a full-time job, and I do this. This is so important. People they've got to reopen their eyes. They've got to start paying attention and participating. If your group has a website and your Patriots group in Eastern Washington, go to that website. Find out who your county leaders are. Go to a committee meeting. Show up. Just volunteer. Lick stamps, make phone calls, send emails. You know what we urge everybody to do? To email at least 2 legislators or 3 every single day. It takes 5 minutes. We've bombarded them with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of emails just to show them we're paying attention. We're spearheading the anti-sanctuary state movement in all of the Jefferson counties, and it's spreading to other counties. We're petitioning the United States Attorney General to arrest the governor. We're considering a citizen's arrest and arresting him ourselves and having federal marshals take him into custody for violation of Title VIII. We're run by a bunch of thieves and crooks and liars, and as people who created government to serve us, we're not going to take it anymore. And there are hundreds of legal, moral, ethical ways to combat this and regain your liberty, folks. The people have all the power. We've always had it. We just have to start using it.
We just have to act like the bosses we are. I mean, that's it.
That's it. Well, we are in charge.
If people want to find out more about the state of Jefferson, where can they go online?
SOJ51.org. If you can afford even $2, we appreciate it, and God bless you. If you can't afford it, send an email, make a phone call, show up to a rally, volunteer in your own community, show up to one of your county commissioners' meetings, show up to your town council meetings. Turn the TV off and open the window that you look through to see if government's doing a good job in your town. It might surprise you. I mean, maybe you got a great bunch of people, but they're under a lot of pressure from the state. I mean, you're a representative. You do a great job in the state of Washington. You're for liberty. You stand up for your constituents. Help the people that want to help you. And you have to do that with direct participation.
Yeah, so it's not going to happen any other way. So how many counties do you have now on board with the State of Jefferson movement?
We have 21 counties that have signed official declarations, and we have 2 more that are about to sign declarations, and they are really working hard to get involved in this movement, and they're fantastic counties. We just had a fundraiser down there, and they made $27,000 in one night. People care about this. They want to see liberty restored in California, hopefully in the state of Jefferson. Our lawsuit will not create a new state. There's no constitutional way to do that. But what we hope to do is set up a representative ratio where we can legislate our way out of the state after we've done that.
So a lot of people say that this will never happen. You guys are beating your head against a wall. It's California. You're way outnumbered. Why even try? Well,
I agree. it's a tough hill to climb. But I would suggest to you that on April 19th, 1775, 70 men, Christian men, stood on Lexington Green against 700 British regulars. And I'm sure there were people there that said, "You're crazy." And they said, "Liberty at all costs." John Adams said, "Liberty must be preserved at all hazards. You have a right to it derived from your maker." And even if this were not true, it was purchased and paid for by your fathers with their ease, their estates, their blood, and their treasure. Are we less than those people? Are we cowards where they were brave? Are we less intelligent? Are we less strong? I say we're not. I say if they can do it, we can do it too.
And don't we owe that to our children to try? I mean, that's what gets me. I mean, are you saying we just shouldn't try? That's what I kind of answer these people. Are you saying we should just lay down and just say, okay, yeah?
We have one job as citizens, and it's codified in our founding documents, to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. That's our only job as a citizen, is to pass on the liberty that your fathers passed on to you, and to pass this country on to your children in the same shape that you got it in. In other words, leave things better than you found them, right? That's what we all try to do. Well, we've failed at that job. My generation has failed. I have several years left in me, I hope, and I will spend every second of that restoring liberty to my children.
I love it, and I really appreciate, again, everything you guys are doing down there. We took a few things out of your playbook. We've got flags flying all over the proposed State of Liberty right now, and people sending in pictures of it. We've got bumper stickers going out all over the place. And one new thing we're looking at doing is, on your computer screen, you got that little camera thing. Most people try to cover it with like a sticky note or something. They're actually camera covers, and we're going to put our Liberty State flag on that so that every time that you cover up your camera, you're reminded of what liberty actually looks like and how real it is to every moment preserve it.
What is your website? Because I want to go and get some of those flags.
Absolutely. You can go to libertystate.org, libertystate.org, and there's a bunch of different things on there. And again, you guys really set the pattern for us. We copied a lot of what you're doing, and just it's been phenomenal, the outpouring. How many people do you think you have as part of the movement down there as a ballpark figure?
Well, I don't know. I would say in excess of 100,000 pretty easily. And new counties from Southern California are calling all the time and saying, "How are you doing this? What should we do? We know we can't join you, but how can we restore liberty in Lower California?" People are tired of this. There are polls in California where 80% of the people are against this sanctuary state idiocy, but yet the government just ignores us. I mean, no one in California has liberty, not even the opposition party has it. They're just waking up to that themselves. We can do this. We're in a position to do it. There's a moment in history. I believe that window is open, but we need to press on, and we can't waste any time. We've got to press this issue as quickly as we can and as hard as we can, and the people are the only ones that can do it. And I God bless you and the people that are working with you, and anything we can do to help you, count us in.
Yeah, the feeling is mutual, Mark. I just appreciate you so much. God bless you. And again, anything we can share on social media for you, would love to do it, and keep up the fight down there. You're an inspiration.
Hey, thanks a lot. You are as well, and thank you very much for having me.
All right, Mark Baird, State of Jefferson. Go check them out, SOJ. Just type it in. It's there. You can take a look at their flag. They've been doing this since the 1940s, probably earlier than that, but the 1940s. I mean, this is a long-standing movement, and the common denominator between the liberty movement here in Washington is people are hungry for freedom and liberty, true freedom and liberty, where they don't have to look over their shoulder at everything they're doing in their small business. They don't have to look over their shoulder when they're cutting a tree down on their own property. They don't have to look over their shoulder when their cow gets a little bit close to the creek. They don't have to look over their shoulder when a wolf tries to attack one of their livestock and they want to take it down. They don't have to look over their shoulder in all of the aspects of their daily life. And that we don't even really know what freedom looks like anymore. But we can feel the draw to it. And that common draw, that common denominator, That is what's spurring all these movements all over the world, not just here in the United States, but all over the world. And it's so great because our founding fathers recognized that there should be a mechanism by which a state could be split to better represent the values, culture, beliefs, heritage of that specific geographic area. And, you know, it's interesting because this would benefit Seattle. They would be better represented in their socialist, communist mindset. They would be. And all the money that they bemoan sending to Eastern Washington, they could keep it for all their programs. Great. And this is what the Founding Fathers talked about the great experiment between states. Let them go down the socialist road. I believe they still need to abide by the Constitution, but let them do what they're going to do down the socialist road with their economy and all their, massive regulations and everything. And let's have our own free society here in liberty and see which one wins. Let's just be intellectually honest and which one will win. And I'm going to tell you something. Here is the key behind all this. They know it will fail. They know it will fail, and they're afraid. So if they know it's going to fail and they're doing it anyway, that's not virtue, as I started the show off with. It's not virtue. It's something entirely different. Well, again, this Saturday up in Newport, looks like the event is going to be maybe at 3 o'clock. I'm going to post it up on Facebook as well, so you can keep coming back and checking with it. 3 o'clock in Newport, Washington. And I'll get a better time. There's 2 different times I was sent. So anyway, we're going to be doing that presentation. Look forward to seeing you there. Go to libertystate.org. Check it out. Order a flag. Fly it. Claim ground for liberty. May God bless all of you, and may he make this generation the greatest one.